Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. This is CBC Windsor News. Thanks for watching. New provincial legislation to deal with a stretched-thin hospital system is officially in effect. Plus, a strike averted. Kids stayed in school today as the province and CUPE reach a deal. Trans Day of Remembrance marked in Windsor yesterday, a day after a shooting in the U.S. reverberates through the LGBTQ community. And making sure the holidays are just as special for the big kids as it is for the little ones. A local woman makes it a priority. Hospital patients designated for long-term care can now be charged $400 per day if they refuse to leave the hospital. This is part of new provincial legislation that looks to free up hospital beds. CBC's Jennifer LaGrassa has been looking into this today and joins me now live in studio. Jen, has anyone in Windsor, Essex been charged under this new rule yet?
I'm told that so far, no one at a hospital in our region has received a $400 fine since that legislation came into effect yesterday. That fine is part of a rule that actually began in September, and it allows hospital patients who are designated for long-term care to be temporarily moved to a home not of their choosing. In southwestern Ontario, patients can be placed at one that's up to 70 kilometers away. This is all in an effort to free up acute care beds and create space for the backlog of surgeries, which was driven by the pandemic. And it's important to note with this bill as well, it was without public input that it was passed. Windsor Regional Hospital's CEO says that fines could happen, but there will be steps before that action is taken.
That is the last thing that is going to happen. The main purpose of this legislation was to allow better conversation, allow a more fulsome conversation with respect to what the opportunities are, be it in the long-term care sector and or at home with appropriate supports.
He says the hospital hasn't even drafted the letter that families would get about the fine, and that having a delay between the start of the new legislation and then the fine actually allowed the hospital to inform people and give them space to process next steps.
Okay, so nobody's been fined yet, but have any patients been moved out of hospital into long-term care under the new rule?
Yeah, all three hospitals in Windsor, Essex told me that it's helped shift patients. So if we take a look here at Erie Shores Healthcare, there are 2 patients waiting to go into long-term care this week. Typically, it's between 7 and 10. At Hotel du Grace Healthcare, they have 6 this week. They were averaging about 8. And Windsor Regional Hospital, we see the biggest change. It was averaging about 30 long-term care patients a day. Now it's down to about 14 on any given week. Mouget says having 16 more beds available is a lifesaver. As we know, hospitals across the province have been dealing with a surge in RSV, flu, and COVID cases.
Every bed is a valuable bed at this stage when we're dealing with the 3 viruses, be it through adults and or pediatrics. So, but for having these arguably, 14, 15, 16 extra beds a day, that would just put pressure on the system. That would back up the emergency department even further. And I think I stated when the legislation came out, if we didn't do this, I can guarantee a crisis by the new year.
Mouget also mentioned that it's hard to find open beds in long-term care homes right now. According to data from the Ministry of Long-Term Care, in 2020 and 2021, people were waiting an average of 68 days to get into a local home.
Jen, ever since this new bill was introduced, it's faced a lot of controversy. What are advocates saying now?
They want it struck down, and they say that it ignores the rights of elderly patients. The Ontario Health Coalition and Advocacy Centre for the Elderly are planning to launch a constitutional challenge against the law. They say that it violates people's human rights.
I understand that there's a problem with acute care beds. Totally, we all understand that. But that doesn't mean that you favor acute care patients in contravention of older people. They're a group of people that are constantly placed last in line. I have great sympathy for the hospitals, but this is not the problem of people waiting for long-term care. They didn't cause the problem.
I think Bill 7 is a horrific piece of legislation because it removes people's rights under the Charter, and I think it coerces them, and that vulnerable and frail portion are still citizens, they're still human beings, and they still have rights.
Advocates have told me that it's really putting the blame of an overwhelmed healthcare system on elderly people. Instead, they say that the government should look at increasing funding to the healthcare system, making more beds available, hiring more staff, and improving the long-term care sector and the home care sector.
Thanks for this, Jen. CBC's Jennifer LaGrassa live in studio tonight. As you heard, healthcare advocates are planning a legal challenge against this new bill. Lorenda Redekop has more on what comes next.
This, in our view, is a really hideous piece of legislation.
Two organizations, the Ontario Health Coalition and the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, plan to launch a charter challenge. They're against a new law that allows hospitals to send patients assessed to need long-term care to a home up to 70 kilometres away in southern Ontario, up to 150 kilometres in the north, to a home they didn't choose.
It will equally result in significant psychological and physical harm to these patients, and for some, likely result in premature death, very likely. Again, that violates the rights to security of person and the right to life.
The government says the law is meant to free up space in hospitals to move out patients deemed to need other types of care, not a hospital bed. And today, the health minister says it's already working.
I am hearing from hospital CEOs who are saying on the ground in their hospital, they have seen alternative level of care beds open up. So now we have beds available for acute care patients.
The health ministry says since this came into effect 2 months ago, more than 2,400 patients have accepted a long-term care bed. And the list of people in hospital waiting for long-term care is down by 20%. The advocacy groups say they plan to file this challenge by the end of the month and expect it'll cost around $500,000. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario's Health Coalition is calling on the province's top doctor to resign after video surfaced showing him unmasked at an indoor event last week.
You would hope that, chief medical officers would model the behavior that we're asking other people to follow. It was sad. When I saw that video, I thought, whoa, he has to resign. I mean, yeah. It is not what we would expect of a chief medical officer of health in this circumstance at all.
The video posted to Toronto Life's Instagram page showed Chief Medical Officer of Health Dr. Kieran Moore without a mask standing close to other guests as they watch a performance. The video comes just days after he strongly recommended masking in indoor public settings, citing pressure to the province's healthcare system. Asked today, Ontario's Deputy Premier says masking is a choice, not a mandate.
No, I think that it's consistent with what we've always said, which is personal choice. You make your own determinations depending on where you are. If the space is crowded indoor, if you are looking after vulnerable individuals, that personal choice is really important in Ontario.
Interim leaders for Ontario's Liberal and NDP parties are not calling for Moore's resignation. They say he should apologize for failing to wear a mask and use the opportunity to clarify masking guidance ahead of the holiday season. We're hearing from the Education Minister today after a strike by CUPE members that would have closed schools again was avoided over the weekend.
I think what matters is the outcome, and we delivered a deal with the parties that provides some stability for kids and keeps them in school today, and I think that's something we should all celebrate.
CUPE President Laura Walton telling the media she's not happy with the deal, saying it was no different than what the government offered last week, but she says the union was told the government was not willing to budge any further. The deal is expected to be put to a vote by CUPE members later this week, with results expected by the weekend. It was an emotional experience for those who marked Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience, a day to commemorate the lives lost to anti-transgender violence. It's also a time for the community to come together and know that there is support. Yesterday, Windsor's Trans Wellness Ontario organization held a ceremony.
There were a lot of tears. There was a sense of community that was beautiful and really meaningful. And people shared their lived experiences, and everyone supported each other.
We had people who gave some very tearful speeches, as well as people who shared the positives and the resilience and strength that our community shows, and it was very nice to get all those different perspectives. Butterflies are an important symbol for a lot of trans folks. We often identify strongly with them, as many of us see ourselves as being transformed, having started as one thing, like the caterpillar at birth, and then as we begin exploring our gender identities and begin going through the process of transition, we feel as though everything is in flux, much like we've spun ourselves into a cocoon, and then we emerge, many of us feel, as butterflies, something totally different from what we were before, but still the same.
There are a lot of people thriving and doing well in this community, and that, yes, we have highlighted the violence that occurs globally, but one thing that I want people to take away from this is that they do have a really loving family at Trans Wellness Ontario, and we all support each other.
We're just people who want to live our lives and live in peace and be happy. We want to share our community with each other, and we just want to live the same kind of lives as anybody else, because ultimately we are just anybody else.
In America, there was a mass shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub, killing 5 people, injuring 25 over the weekend. Carrier at Trans Wellness Ontario couldn't immediately comment, but says she wants people to know that the transgender community in Ontario stands united. Meanwhile, tributes continue in the United States for the Colorado Springs victims. This is at a vigil last night near Los Angeles. A vigil was also held yesterday at a church in Colorado Springs. A 22-year-old man has been arrested and was treated for injuries. Saturday's attack is the 6th mass killing in the U.S. this month. It's the start of a big week of testimonies at the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. And it comes 2 days after a vehicle convoy protesting masks drove through Windsor on Saturday without incident, a reminder of what happened at the Ambassador Bridge in February, something discussed at the inquiry today. Hearing from the top official at Canada's spy agency. The head of CSIS says he recommended the government invoke the legislation during the convoy protests last winter. Marina von Stackelberg explains.
The record, please state your full name.
The head of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, also known as CSIS, says he felt the Emergencies Act was required. And he says he told the Prime Minister that directly. The advice came the day before the government would bring in the never-before-used legislation. It gave sweeping powers to authorities to shut down protests. It was February 13th. Downtown Ottawa had been occupied by convoy protesters for 3 weeks. Borders to the United States remained blockaded. The Prime Minister held a special meeting of cabinet and experts. At the end of the meeting, he asked CSIS Director David Vigneault what he thought.
He advised the Prime Minister of his belief that it was indeed required to invoke the Act. And again, you remember saying that during the closed session?
Yes.
To invoke the Emergencies Act, the government must believe there is a threat to Canada's security, one so serious it's a national emergency. It needs to endanger the lives, health, or safety of Canadians, and must be so major local authorities can't deal with it. The inquiry has repeatedly heard evidence that earlier on, the CSIS director did not think the convoy posed a threat to national security based on its own criteria. But Vigneault testified he then learned the Emergencies Act used a broader definition of a threat. So that night he told the Prime Minister, based on what he was seeing across the country, the bar was met to invoke the Act.
This is, I think, is the crux of the issue. So as director of CSIS, we're very familiar, my colleague and I, we know the Act fairly well, of CSIS Act. I was not familiar with the details of the Emergencies Act.
Last week, senior government officials, including the clerk of the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's top security advisor, both testified they also felt the escalating situation warranted the use of the legislation. And that's what they told the Prime Minister.
This is the most anticipated week of the inquiry. The public will finally hear from those who ultimately made the decision to invoke the Act. That includes top-ranking cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister himself. He's set to testify on Friday. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
It's the time of year when many who can donate to help those who may need extra support. Often when it comes to donating gifts, they tend to be for younger children. But one local woman wants to make sure the older youth at the Sandwich Teen Action Group aren't left out this year.
My background is in social work. I have been in social service work for about 20 years. And just before I started working this full time, that's what I did. I was a social worker. And I'm also a mom of 7, and my oldest is 24, my youngest is 2. So when I was getting my social work degree, when I was struggling, working a job to try to, because I'm a social support parent, I also went to these places to get assistance, and there was never anything for my teens. So I was like, that's not fair. Like, what's a parent supposed to do? And then when I started working as a social worker, I would refer my clients to these amazing organizations, but again, it stopped at 12, stopped at 13. So it was from years and years and years of seeing this, and I'm like, one day I'm gonna do something about this, and this is the year.
When you think Christmas and gifts, you think kids, but that catchment group in between, I'd say the teenage years, 16, 17, 18, they sort of get lost in the shuffle. It's like they're not as important when it comes to Christmas. So when she approached me with the ideal, I thought, you know what, that's very interesting and is very true.
So we're supposed to be distributing at the Stag's Christmas dinner that they do for the teens. I'm going actually to meet John Monday or Tuesday to try to get an idea of numbers, and so we can actually have enough stuff for everybody. But I've also been receiving, I think, calls from parents, hoping to get gifts as well. And we want to do this every single year. We're hoping to get yearly sponsors. We have one yearly sponsor, yay, so far. But I want this to be like the other drives, where it's every single year people sign up and they get the assistance. It's just for their teenagers.
And for more on how to donate, you can go to our website, check out the story at cbc.ca/Windsor. We've got a live look outside there. Another chilly day with temperatures dropping to -6 overnight. Colette Kennedy will be here right after the break. Colette Kennedy joins us now for a look at our weather forecast. Colette, I was out today working on a story and it was very cold outside. And somebody actually asked me, when is it going to be spring again? We're already over it.
And it's November, right?
Yeah.
We have a little ways to go.
Okay. All right. Talk us through it, Colette.
Yes. And you know what a weekend, but even parts of last week, I mean, the cold air, right? Some communities just getting hit so hard with snowfall. You've probably heard about Buffalo, Orchard Park area there, over 200 centimeters. But even Wyerton, with the event, it came up over 120 centimeters there. So by event, I mean more than just the one day, it's a couple of days. So then we look at what's a normal high for this time of year and a normal low. Well, it was hard to feel it maybe because of the winds being so breezy, but today's high, actually, we did pretty well, pretty close to seasonal. The wind just kind of had an impact, and certainly it was a chilly start to the day in terms of what we were looking at there. So let's just take you through what's going on now at the current readings. Actually, the winds associated with a system moving through, and we're getting behind the cold front, so we're going to see those temperatures falling off tonight. But we'll also see the winds falling off. These are the sustained winds. The wind gusts already dropping below 30 kilometers an hour in these areas. However, there are still some special weather statements in place just a little further to the east where the gusts are 60 to 80 kilometers an hour. And the forecast for these winds will stop this kind of in the wee morning hours. You can see they basically let up. Now, tomorrow during the day, they'll pick up, but still 10, 15 kilometers an hour, nothing to write home about there. That's what's left over to the east with the special weather statement in those areas, just in case you're doing some traveling. But by the time you get from here to there, they'll already have improved. A little bit of light flurry activity to the north. Otherwise, we're looking at mostly clear skies and starting off with a bit of cloud cover building in the morning, but then I think we'll see clearing more into the afternoon, so sunshine coming back at us. That's going to be nice, not only for Tuesday, but seeing some sunshine. And you can see it's not happening elsewhere in the province, but some sunshine into Wednesday too. So, and with the temperatures kind of running closer to seasonal, that's going to be nice, especially when you've got to wake up to lows like this. Okay, by tomorrow morning, once the sun comes up, we'll see that temperature kick up from -6 to about -2, -3 pretty quickly, and then into the afternoon up to 6 degrees. Look at Wednesday, Thursday. Yes, we do have showers at the end of the week, but I said showers, not snow. Any areas with snow, though, you know, there was a bit of melt today, and then tonight with the freeze, just watch out in the morning with some of the sidewalks and things.
Okay. Thanks for this, Colette. Appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome.
When we come back, the FIFA World Cup is in full swing, but with it comes controversy. Stay with us. Qatar's record on human rights made it a controversial choice to host soccer's World Cup. And even though the tournament has started, the controversy is not fading. The CBC's Thomas Daigle has the story.
Qatar isn't known for soccer or protests, but on the World Cup's first full match day, it witnessed both. England's team taking a knee against inequality before the opening whistle. That part was planned. The replacement armband on Captain Harry Kane, an unexpected switch.
I don't think the World Cup should have been in Qatar, so these things are not surprising to me.
At this London pub, they enjoyed England's win despite the last-minute complication. 7 team captains had vowed to take the field wearing this rainbow One Love armband in a host country that considers same-sex relations criminal. But all those teams abruptly backed out.
I think it's amazingly unfair of FIFA to put them into that position.
Soccer's governing body threatened to punish the players, each with a yellow card, if they wore the armbands unapproved by FIFA. And 2 yellow cards means suspension for a game.
This is not a player's decision. Imagine going on the pitch with a clear yellow card to start with. That is not possible.
U.S. and Canadian officials weren't keen to speak up either ahead of meetings with Qatar's deputy prime minister. Canada's international development minister was even asked why criticism of this country can seem like walking on eggshells.
For Canada, this is not about walking on eggshells. It's about having a constructive dialogue for progress.
Before Iran hit the pitch, Iranians brought their country's protests all the way to the World Cup.
To show our support for the country and the people, but not the support for the regime.
In what was widely believed to be their own protest during the national anthem, the Iranian squad stayed silent, seemingly speaking volumes. Before the tournament even began, FIFA warned teams to focus squarely on soccer. In this country, freedom of the press is not guaranteed. Neither is freedom of expression. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Al Rayyan, Qatar.
The Governor General has appointed 3 new senators. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau unveiled the appointments today. They are Dr. Sharon Burey, Andrew Cardozo, and Rear Admiral Rebecca Patterson. Burey is from Windsor and a pediatrician who is a recognized health advocate for children. Cardozo, a public policy expert, columnist, and artist. Patterson is the first person with a military nursing background to ever lead at the rank of Flag General Officer. The trio will sit as independent senators to fill vacancies for Ontario. That is it for CBC Windsor News. For news anytime, go to our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.